All right, continuing with our update, we've got the servo tray installed. We've used some more like a heavy fiberglass here. It's about an inch wide. Folded it in half and ran it one half on the tray, one half on the fuselage. I made sure to wipe the fuselage down with rubbing alcohol to remove any release agents that may be there. We used 30-minute epoxy and a good old playing card to squeegee out the excess epoxy, which always works really well. I learned a little tip from someone that while it may seem like a good idea to leave excess epoxy on the fiberglass, it's actually not. It actually becomes brittle. So if you squeegee out the epoxy, it actually becomes even stronger. So anyway, so the rudder servo will go here. The elevator servos will go here. Normally this would be a spot for a pneumatic servo, but we're not using that at all. We're doing electronic retracts. So the installation is pretty straightforward in terms of the servos. Not really all that complicated, so more to come. All right, continuing with our update, you can see we've got the control horn installed. I know I used probably way too much epoxy, but I really wanted to fill it. These skins, although these skins are very strong, they're actually quite thin. You can just use an X-Acto blade to cut through them. And I wanted to make sure we had some really good support here on the rudder, because there's going to be quite a bit of force generated because of the speed and the size of the rudder. I'll give you a perspective of the size. Here's my hand. Pull back a little bit. Here's my hand, and you can see how big that rudder is. That's a big rudder. Also, if we come over here to the fuselage, you can see that we have the servo tray installed in the fuselage. And because there was some slight differentiation in terms of the shape of the servo tray out here, and because of the force generated by these servos, I mean, each of these servos are going to generate about 700 ounces of torque. So that's about 2,100 ounces of torque generated. That's a massive amount of torque. I didn't want the servo tray popping out in flight. So we fiberglassed it in place, as you can see there. And better view probably right over here as well. There you go. And so that worked really well. Very strong, very strong. Used 30-minute epoxy and used heavy fiberglass about an inch wide, roughly. And so that worked extremely well. All right, quick update. We've got our control horns installed on our elevator, as you can see. I used quite a bit of epoxy because the skin on this thing, although it's tough, it's a thin fiberglass. It is thin, and it can be rather flexible and pliable, and it's hollow. So you really needed a lot of epoxy. We normally never do something that messy, but it needed quite a bit of epoxy. Anyway, what we have to do is see the gap right there in the front, that little area. We've got to fill that in. That wasn't supposed to make that cut according to the designer. But I've got some fiberglass sheet, which just arrived today. And that is over here. That's what this stuff is. It looks like carbon fiber, but it's really a fiberglass sheet. And what I'm doing right now is I'm actually cutting. First of all, we'll take a couple pieces and we'll cut them and fill in those gaps on the elevators. But what I'm doing right now is I'm actually cutting new hinges. As I mentioned before, these hinges, although really nicely made because they have that wonderful ball bearing, they're just too short. And they don't grab enough of the trailing edge of either the rudder or the elevators. So I'm actually taking this hinge, which is one of their stock hinges that does come with the airplane, and I'm cutting this, and you can see the difference in length right off the bat when you look at it there. So the hinges are here. We've got 6 of them cut. They're not glued in yet, but they are there. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut some here for the elevator. We're not going to make them as long because there is a spar in the center right here. And if I make them as long as these, which of course is this length right here, they wind up hitting the spar in the center. So we're just going to go ahead and make about half the length, and that should work. And that's pretty much it. So that's where we are right now, and more to come.